This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
Speaker then is Professor James Sanchez, Professor of Latin American History at Utah State University. He took his PhD in Latin American History at the University of Pittsburgh in 2000. And he is the author of a very interesting book published by Duke in 2014, The Vanguard of the Atlantic World, Creating Modernity, Nation and Democracy in 19th Century Latin America. And also author of another book published by Duke in 2004, Contentious Republicans, Popular Politics, Race and Class in 19th Century Colombia. And I've got that one on my shelf. So his paper today is entitled Decolonising Europe. Thank you.
Thank you for that kind introduction. Thanks to Mark for organizing this conference and for inviting me here, and to Olga for getting me here. I appreciate that very much. This paper is part of my larger project of looking at trying to recreate parts of the 19th century, especially how many people in Colombia and Mexico thought themselves what it meant, and what democracy meant for them, and what civilization, or maybe what we have to call modernity, meant for them. And so today I'm going to focus on one part of this project, which is what they thought about Europe, and how they thought Europe was related to colonialism, which seemed to fit our topic. So to begin, in the middle of the 19th century, many Colombians and Mexicans were confident their societies were well on their way to overcoming the legacies of colonialism. Their young nations were not trapped by the weight of the past, but creating a new civilización moderna based on democratic republican political and social systems that guarantee citizen rights to a universal, if male, citizen body. So were these politicians and newspaper essayists and even indigenous villagers and Afro-Colombian tenants, were they simply deluded? Trapped by a colonialist mentality that did not even allow them to imagine decolonization, as Walter Mignolo has suggested? Or does their confidence in their society's political modernity challenge our own assessments of colonialism's legacies and the history of the nation and democracy's origins? I will argue that for a mid-century moment, many Mexicans and Colombians thought it was not their societies that must be decolonized, but rather Europe. Indeed, it was Europe, not the Americas, that was truly trapped by colonialism's taint. Monarchy, aristocracy, feudalism, ultramontane religion, and the actual internal colonization of many European peoples, such as Irish, Italians, Hungarians, and Poles. Mexicans via La Reforma, and Colombians via liberal constitutions and victories over conservatives in 1853 and 1863, would create new nations with a new citizen body that would enjoy the fruits of liberty, equality, and fraternity. Europe, meanwhile, in this vision, was still lorded over by inbred tyrants and a corrupt, decadent aristocracy. My apologies to our host country. While most of European subjects were so oppressed, they, quote, almost do not feel their chains. There was hope, however, for Europe. The Americans' Revolution, quote, the eagles of American democracy, would cross the Atlantic and transmogrify Europe, would inspire internal rebellions, would regenerate European society. In short, the Americas would decolonize Europe. So today, I will first explore how Mexicans and Colombians thought about colonialism in Europe, and I'm looking at the period from the 1850s to the 1870s. I'll also briefly explore how some popular Mexicans and Colombians, not very concerned with Europe directly, expressed a great faith in the potential of their new nations and citizenship, which might be their own imagining of how decolonization would work and what it would mean. Then I'll turn to how these ideas about European backwardness may have crossed the Atlantic via the debate over Maximilian's execution. And finally, I will consider how this story suggests some reconsideration of Spanish Americas and Europe's roles in the story of decolonization and postcolonialism. So as the French invaded Mexico in 1862, a Guadalajara paper argued that Mexico, quote, represents the interests of the New World, land of democracy, combating the interests of the old world, led to tyranny and human degradation. In mid-century Mexico and Colombia, such proclamations of American superiority were common. Mexican and Colombians, writing in newspapers and writing at public gatherings, regularly contrasted America's progress in security, human freedom, and true civilization of having escaped colonialism's legacies with European backwardness and retrogression. And by the 1860s at the latest, a broad consensus had emerged in both Colombia and Mexico that the future of the world lay in their societies. While many still saw Europe as cultured and powerful, public and politics in the Americas had shifted the center of civilization. A Mexican provincial newspaper argued that by instilling democracy, Mexico had not only reached the same level of civilization as Europe, but would also, quote, resuscitate the republican genius of France, awakening her subjects and slaves. A Colombian newspaperman put it more succinctly in 1864, Europe is the past, America the future. Civilization, once defined by Europe, had now passed to the Americas, and the flow of modernity, once imagined as emanating from Europe to the Americas, had now reversed and would follow the Gulf Stream from the New World to the Old. Elsewhere, in my book, I call this alternative vision of civilization that ruled the mid-century public sphere, American Republican modernity. In this mentality, modernity was not defined by European high culture or economic gains, but by the adoption of Republican politics, enacted by citizens of new nations, and whose locus was the Americas, not Europe. And this discourse was not limited to Mexico and Colombia, though that's my focus today. In 1860, Alfredo Carrillo of Chile argued that Latin America had decolonized itself already, but Europe had not. I'm quoting. America, throwing off the iron collar of colonialism, already has completed the Great Revolution, the Great Transformation, the Great Execution of the past. But Europe still suffered under monarchs and caudillos. Colonialism, associated in this case with monarchy, was European, and Europeans still suffered under it. Americans had broken colonialism's chains through their democratic revolutions, and again, they're imagining now these, by this point, as you're following what Francisco's talking about, at this point, they're definitely imagining these independence wars as these revolutions against this colonial past, which of course was not the case earlier. By this point, that sort of solidified in their minds. So they'd already broken colonialism, but renewed European imperial adventures didn't worry many Americans. Gavino Ortiz, speaking to the Morelia National Guard in 1862, and he was speaking to several thousand soldiers, he would mock Europeans thusly. The decrepit nations of Europe, their rotten thrones and their sickly dynasties, their rancid and strange institutions that ruled them, all feel the convulsions of their final agony. In order to distract themselves from the frightening spectacle of a past from which they flee, from a present that escapes them, and from an inevitable future, they turn their sights on young America, object of their envy, hatred, insatiable greed. Ortiz would proceed to mock with the French and the Spanish their intention to bring back to Mexico the Inquisition, the cow, and the stocks. He claimed that such old world fanaticism, this colonial spirit, was inappropriate in the century of enlightenment. So present-day critics of modernity have applauded themselves for dismantling the totalizing claims of European modernity, which some assume non-Europeans accepted in the past. But I contend 19th century Latin Americans had already dismantled Europe's claims to modernity and the power to define barbarism. 19th century historical actors were provincializing Europe long before postcolonial scholars' theoretical contortions. Europe was no longer the center, but now the periphery, which must reform itself if it hoped to catch up to the Americas and to the future. If, in this vision, Europe appeared to need colonizing more than its former colonies, this did not mean that destroying colonialism's legacy was not a concern in Colombia and Mexico. The colonial epoch was shorthand by this point for backwardness, domination by ultramontane clergy, indigenous communal landholding, the caste system, and economic stagnation. Independence was only the first step toward overcoming colonialism. Liberals' mid-century triumphs were much more important. Ramon Mercado argued that independence had not really changed the colonial system by the 1840s, as, quote, the war against Spain was not a revolution. So here's actually a different imagining of this moment. It had not ended slavery, the power of the church, or the aristocracy. and most were still excluded from their role in government. And notice almost all these definitions of colonialism, save slavery, were still powerfully associated with mid-century Europe. It would take, quote, the social revolution of liberal reforms to truly remake society, a revolution carried out by the poor and dispossessed who, quote, contributed to the triumph of democracy. By 1852, Colombian President Jose Lopez, echoing Magrado, declared in his speech that, quote, a social revolution had occurred, under his leadership. And, quote, the reign of democracy and liberty has arrived to destroy the feudalism of the Middle Ages, which still oppressed society and specifically for slavery at that moment. So these liberal reformers were sure they were overcoming colonialism, and this confidence belies Walter McNolan's assertion that Latin America was trapped by the remnants of colonialism in an unsuitable Atlantic Republican tradition. For him, decolonization was not an option in the 19th century. Yet Colombians and Mexicans did not think themselves doomed by European colonialism, but saw their societies leading the way to the creation of a new American democratic republicanism that destroyed colonialism. The old metropole was trapped by the past, trapped by colonialism's legacies of empires, monarchies, aristocracies, and such peoples, not the young new world. Mexicans and Colombians have redefined modernity, its locus and meaning, long before 20th century decolonization and postcolonial studies. Feel a little like Marco Rubio at this moment. So this discourse of Europe's backwardness emanated from a public sphere of political speeches and newspapers produced by elite middling actors, if shared by popular groups as well as readers and listeners in taverns and cockfighting pits and bureaucratic societies. What were the ideas of popular groups, however, about decolonization? Subalterns understandably did not much concern themselves with Europe, and we talking about it much the way sort of the obsession of more middle class or writers. But they definitely engaged in another aspect of decolonization, the nation. The decolonization literature, however, has looked with great suspicion on the postcolonial nation as a vehicle for subaltern inclusion, but a mild one. See the nation as mostly working to exclude subalterns or are helpless to shelter them from the ravages of global capitalism. And because so many of us in our own political commitments are so dissatisfied with the nation as a vehicle for progressive politics, we assume teleologically that it was destined to fail. This was not the attitude of many 19th century popular groups, at least in Mexico and Colombia, where the nation seemed to promise great hopes for meaningful citizenship and the ability to influence the nation state. The Republican nation promised a path of decolonization, a chance to create new, more inclusive political identities with which to pursue social and economic goals, such as abolishing slavery or obtaining land. And as is now well established by many people in this room, after independence, subalterns of various backgrounds, be they Indians, Afro-Latin Americans, or mestizo campesinos, eagerly claimed citizenship in their new nations, and crucially, they expected this citizenship to matter. Popular groups quickly grasped that they now inhabit a new political and social space and seized the opportunities the nation or republicanism presented, especially compared to the colonial, anarchical, and feudal past, which, as we saw in the public sphere, was associated with Europe. The residents of Tumaco, Colombia, in a land dispute with some merchants, derided the merchants' efforts as an attempt to establish, quote, a wretched feudalism, and demanded that the state protect their equality of rights. So subalterns did not just contrast democracy and republicanism with feudalism and colonialism, but it also expected the new nation states to respond to their demands as citizens. In 1871, Indians from the Aldea of Cajamarca, also in Colombia, insisted that their resguardos not be divided. They noted how under colonialism they had been, quote, beaten down by Spanish greed into the most degrading state of slavery and misery, but now ruled an enlightened republican government that proclaims equality. Therefore, their wishes as citizens should be respected. Similarly, Sebastián Silva petitioned the local government of Popayan for help in return for her son, who was forced to work as a domestic servant. Her son was being held, quoting, as if we were still in the barbarous times in which the government allowed the slavery of men. Today, thankfully, we have a Republican and Democratic government that will not allow such monstrosities. Silva was poor, illiterate, she had a sign her name with an X, and a woman. She's probably Afro-Colombian, but that's a little less clear from the documentation. but she still expected a Republican and Democratic government owed her a response. She and the Indians of Catamarca cleverly manipulated American Republican modernity, equating slavery with barbarism and calling on the state to justify its own claims to democratic Republican legitimacy. Subalterns heard the discourse of Europe's backwardness due to monarchy, aristocracy, and equality, and insisted their new post-colonial environments of democracy and republicanism signify something meaningful to them. Many of the poor and working class were able to take advantage of this discourse, asserting their citizenship and claiming rights to promote their own agendas, be it to protest after monopolies, protect land holdings, demand pensions, the list goes on and on, claims that are now well documented in the nation's state-creation literature. So we know that the nation failed in the end, but that should not cause us to dismiss the hopes of Mexico and Colombia's subalterns. And it should suggest care when assuming that nations function the same in post-colonial environments in the 1850s as they did in the 1950s. What nations could be was still unknown in the 19th century, and the state was often too weak to effectively control dissent. The nation did not fail because of the inherent limitations of citizenship and rights, but because elite state makers feared these rights, and by the 1880s were finally powerful enough to restrict them in order to attract capitalist development. And that's the story that I pursue more in the book, but I don't have time to get here. The question of the nation also brings us back to decolonizing Europe. As central to Europe's failure in this vision is its lack of successful revolutions that led to modern nation states. Instead, she was suffering under kingdoms and empires, with people as subjects and not citizens. And here the decolonization literature again might give us pause. As in 19th century Spanish America, the nation was not seen as a hostile and imposed entity of elite control, but one that many subalterns eagerly embraced. Yet did these Spanish American visions of Europe's need for a decolonizing revolution to establish new republican nations as citizens reach Europe? And if so, how might this have happened? So even if this discourse only existed in Spanish America, I would still argue it's vital for understandings of decolonization, modernity, and nation. However, there is some evidence that Spanish American conceptions of modernity and revolution reached Europe. And in the longer paper that I sent, I discussed the Garibaldinos of Uruguay and their efforts to influence Italian nationalism and unification there. That also Federica talks about it in her fascinating paper. But for reasons of time, I'll just focus on how Europe reacted to Maximilian's execution in Mexico. So, in Maximilian's execution by the Mexican liberal government in 1867 and Mexico's Republican triumph, we see how even in Europe some Democrats assumed that the Americas, not Europe, would lead the way to new civilization. Of course, most Europeans were horrified by this. This was proof of American barbarism, that warrants would do such a thing, that you would spill world blood in this way. But not all. The French revolutionary writer Piat, in a letter he wrote for, quote, the Republican French workers, saluted Juarez for joining the pantheon of Republican heroes. Piat celebrated Juarez's execution of Maximilian as avenging the lost republics of France and Rome. He mocked Europeans gasping at Juarez's supposed barbarism, declaring that the Mexican president had given, quote, a lesson in justice to degenerate European civilization, an example Europeans would do well to follow in revolting against their own monarchs and oppression. Quoting, your thunderclap, emanating from the Andes, has shaken the world. And I was going to make a joke about how he was like he had a little geographic problem there with the Andes, but then we were talking last night that often the Andes were seen as actually all the mountains of the Americas extending from Tierra del Fuego up through what we would now call the Rockies to North America. So Piat concluded that perhaps, quote, in a France regenerated by Mexico, there might also be justice. So here it is backward monarchical Europe that must be decolonized by a Republican revolution. Progressive Europeans saw the Americas as ultimately decolonizing Europe and showing it the path to the future, even if obviously a small minority. So in conclusion, how much does the theoretical position of decolonization actually decenter and reduce your privilege, historiographically speaking? In many ways, it seems to reify Europe's hegemonic position, if now with a negative valuation. It can present Europe as the norm and the former colonies are trying to decolonize themselves to fix their broken societies that Europe corrupted. Yet in the 19th century, many Mexicans and Colombians were sure that it was Europe that was behind. Europe that suffered from many of the problems of colonialism: monarchy, oligarchy, lack of national sovereignty, lack of meaningful national inclusion as citizens, that their own societies were on the road to overcoming. The Colombian Juan de Dios Restrepo evoked this sense of an Atlantic-wide struggle for decolonization thusly. The situation of America is dire. The fight between the colonial system and the modern liberal spirit, between the paganism of the Roman priest and the evangelical Christian idea, between those that dream of reestablishing slavery, privilege, monarchy, theocracy, and those that believe that all these abominations should remain in Europe. This formulation challenges both modernizationists and post-colonialist assumptions of where so-called Western democracy and rights originated, and how the struggles against colonialism were seen in the 19th century. The West's reification as world history's all-powerful hero or villain has stakes far beyond the historiographic. Edward Said critiques an imperial historiography that claims, quote, Western ideas of freedom led the fight against colonial rule, while ignoring long-standing indigenous, Asian, and African resistance. The limit of such post-colonial formulations is that while rightly critiquing those who ignore non-European ideas and practices, they still accept that certain ideas of freedoms or rights or democracy are somehow wrongly argued Western. Mid-century orators and writers do not see Europe as a promoter of equality or rights, but the largest obstacle, along with their own conservative opponents in their societies, in creating a more just world. So Colombians and Mexicans' understanding of post-colonialism do call into question some of the assumptions of this conference. I'm not arguing that colonialism did not leave powerful legacies of racism, inequality, and economies geared to serve outside interests. But I am arguing that Mexicans and Colombians thought they had a project for solving these problems, the creation of democratic republics representing vibrant nations of citizens. These plans not failed only because of their own inadequacies and lacunae, such as the racism of elites, the incompatibility of elite liberalism's privileging of property rights, and popular liberalism's demands for more equality, perhaps even limits the concept of citizenship of nations themselves. However, these projects mainly failed because they were destroyed in the interest of capital investment by the power of racial division and civilization imitating the North Atlantic. By the 1880s and 1890s, you no longer see talk this way, and then Europe has regained its place as something that should be pursued and imitated, at least in certain values. Spain has now been recovered, has been now sort of re-evaluated as providing a spiritual, hispanidad that we should follow. And there's a desperate attempt to catch up with the economic progress seen in the U.S. and Europe. If, as Mark suggested in his preface to the conference, we might use decolonization to rethink world history and to include Latin America, we must also include Europe. Not just Europe, the conqueror exploiter, although surely that. Europe is a place where revolution largely failed, where a nation was redefined away from its early emancipatory potential. As not the place where the anachronistically mislabeled Western values of democracy, citizenship, and rights developed, but where, due to its own internal colonial past, they failed.